say to just one or two little points in this section, and we're going to get into the actual work tomorrow. So if you keep hearing me referring to the law of three and you're saying, what's the law of three? What's the law of three? What's that? Relax. We're going to take it apart very slowly tomorrow, but not tonight, okay? It won't work tonight. I'd like to give a little bit more on some lead-up background and could say that one of the reasons that I became interested in this Trinity and why I'm standing here is because I guess I'm a failed feminist. That, as many of you know, it's been increasingly the trend in liberal sections in recent years in theology to refer to the Holy Spirit as she. And more that's become almost de rigueur among right-thinking groups. And there are some very, very good reasons why this is done. You know, certainly you could say that the Holy Spirit is really in some sense identical with Sophia, the holy wisdom of God that's portrayed as feminine in the Bible. That's true. You can say that most of the words that we have in our tradition that are spirit words, or in other words, breath words, are feminine. And you can also say that just the way the Holy Spirit works in all this greenness is much more parallel to the traits that we usually call feminine ways of knowing and being. So for all these reasons, it makes really, really good sense to do that. Plus the fact that just looking at the situation, I guess it's not any particular news to look at the way male images have dominated our Judeo-Christian symbol structure, and how this lends itself, like glove in hand, to male domination of power structures. So it would seem that if you could at least get a female on the Trinity, you know, that at least you're doing something to redress the balance, you know. So for all these very, very good reasons, it has been an increasingly snowballing, almost politically gender-correct thing to do. I remember being at a conference about 10 years ago up in Canada at this retreat center where their mission statement was about bringing together different arms of the Christian spectrum so that they at least could be in the same room together. So we were at one worship service. We were sharing it. There was a group of feminists working on new images for God, was one conference. The other was a kind of new praise music for worship, a kind of essentialist side. When they came together for worship, we had the whole audience walk out in 2 blocks. The first half walked out because they called the Holy Spirit He. The second half walked out because they called the Holy Spirit she. So anyway, we're out there in a dilemma, and I have to say, just to stand up for my feminist person, that I found myself somewhat appalled at the fact that I was actually uncomfortable with this. I didn't know where it was coming from because it all seemed right on paper. But every time I heard it, something went, ouch, not quite right. And it took me a long time to get to the bottom of it. And I think at least from where I'm coming from, I was correct in my discomfort. And I want to lay out why I think this is so. Remember the china closet I told you about in the last talk? Well, feminizing the Trinity would be something akin to ripping all of that mysterious, ugly electronic gear out to make room to put the sheets on the bottom row. In other words, In other words, there's something that we're in ignorance of. And yes, to feminize the third person, to call the Holy Spirit she, is a good, quick fix. And probably in our times, we need quick fixes. But in the long run, it's a disaster. It is like gutting your china closet because it mixes the waters and confuses something of what is actually the most powerful aspect of this beautiful arcanum that we were given in the Trinity. And I want to try, if you'll bear with me, to say why this is so. We've talked about the difference between the Trinity as a theological symbol and the Trinity as a metaphysical symbol. And it's really important to keep these two distinctions in mind. And again, it's like Bach and Mozart. It's not like one of them's right and one of them's wrong. They're different ways of looking at reality. And the only way you get in trouble is if you mix them up not knowing what you're doing. And when we look at the Trinity from a theological point of view, which is how most of us are looking at it, and is basically the way in which Richard is going to be developing it with you, the essence of the Trinity is that it's a community of persons. And although the exact relationship between these persons escapes almost everybody but trained theologians, we do know they're three persons and that they love one another. And that they love one another in a particularly wonderful way by a love which is completely self-outpouring and self-giving. In other words, what makes the love in the Trinity work is that the Father pours himself into the Son completely, nothing held back. The Son pours himself into the Spirit completely, nothing held back. The Spirit pours himself, herself, completely into the Father, nothing held back. And so what you kind of have out of this is you have the image I like to use is of, the water buckets on an old Mississippi paddle steamer. The way they go, when one bucket pours into another bucket, pours into another bucket, pours into another bucket, what you have is it makes it go round. And what gets generated by it going round and round is energy. And when it comes to the Trinity, the energy that's generated is love. So when you're looking at the Trinity theologically, what is core is the relationship between the persons. And Richard is going to take this and take it into outer space for you. I mean, just every bit of how wonderful and vast this is. But the theological explanation of the Trinity really does rely on the persons, and the persons being, in some sense, you have to pick your words carefully here, but personable, being having essentially some anthropomorphic characteristics, like love and community and things like that. So we're working in that ballpark, and it's a profound place to work. And when you're working on the Trinity theologically, it's not so bad to level things out and take one of the male persons and turn it into a female person. It all works because the persons are all intact, and you can still have the complete love. So working theologically, that works. Working metaphysically, it doesn't work. And when we look at the Trinity from a metaphysical standpoint, it's not so much about persons in relationship as it is about a process by which the world is constructed and maintained. And I'm going to, just for a little bit this evening, ask us to make a separation between those two. Because you may think they're identical, but it helps if we separate them out a little bit. And what was bothering me, and what I've been able to put words around, is that when it comes to looking at the Trinity as a metaphysical symbol, as a process, basically there are two kinds of metaphysical systems in the world. There are binary systems and there are ternary systems. And what happens when we try to feminize the Trinity? By just turning the Holy Spirit into a female, is we mix up these two systems. Okay, let me explain what I mean by this. The vast majority of the world's great metaphysical systems are binary systems. They work on the principle of paired equal opposites. Yin and yang being probably the most familiar. And most of the ancient metaphysical systems work on this principle. So you see the world working in these great archetypal polarities that are somehow held in balance. Okay? So you have male, female, dark, light, conscious, unconscious, good, evil. You know, our systems tend to like to work on those. And some of those most ancient, if you look at the old Hindu systems, you see this, the Prakriti and the Purusha, the force of action, the force of being. Our minds seem to feel comfortable in that kind of a binary swing. Now, when we talk about a binary system, we're talking about two implications of it. First of all, it likes symmetry. Okay? So it comes to a resolution in stasis. The things are balanced, opposite, equal pairs. So it's a system that tends to come to a rest in symmetry. Okay? So that's what the great systems of the world, our basic metaphysical background, is all about. And when we work in feminism today, we're reinventing the wheel in that great old system. You know, male energy, male characteristics, female characteristics, receptive, acting, contemplative. It's almost like our brain has been wired to think in that kind of way. So we may think that that's the only reality there is. But there isn't. There are ternary systems. And they work, rather than working on the principle of paired opposites, which reach their balance point in equilibrium, a ternary system imagines or stipulates three independent forces coming together to form, through their interweaving, a fourth. Now, this isn't as complicated as it looks. How many legs does it take to hold up a chair? What's the minimum number you have to have something you can sit on? 3, right. A tripod, right? What's, for all of you who are not hair challenged, what's the minimum number of strands you need to make a braid hold? 3. There is something about the number 3 and the interweaving of threeness, which results in creating something new that didn't exist before, which is not just a swinging back and forth between two old things that were already there, but a drive into a brand new dimension that is sustained by the interweaving of the 3. So instead of there being two forces which are archetypally paired opposites, there are 3 which have to come together in a slightly different way, rearrange themselves, but whose net result is that things drive into a new dimension. My suspicion is that Christianity is of that nature. I read a book many, many years ago it's one of these brilliant sort of unknown books that never got on the bestseller list, but it was called The Reflexive Universe by a rather remarkable man by the name of Arthur Young, who studied evolution in 7 stages through the various kingdoms, from starting with electrons, molecules, right up through the animals, and he divided them into the odd kingdoms and the even kingdoms. And he said that even kingdoms stabilize, odd kingdoms improvise. So things that end with 1, 3, 5, 7 push into something new, are the cause of a new arising. And kingdoms that are based on stabilities, paired stabilities, rest where they are. Now, I think the importance of this may escape you at the moment. I'll try and pick up some of the more pieces of it. I'm not going to push too far with it tonight. I just want you to flag it. That I think that what Christianity has been given is the understanding that there is something in the incarnation of Jesus, the way that God created, sustains, and is still creating the world, the way that God is pushing into new, the way that the human incarnate experience is precious in a way that it's not precious in almost any of the other great world traditions that tend to think of it as either illusion, Maya, or something to be worked through so you get to the better place. In Christianity, it's held on to the core insight that something happens here that's so precious that God's self, needed to be a part of it, fully a part of it. And I think the real explanation for that, the real mystery of that, is unpackaged when you put that up against the lens of the law of 3. So the point is that when you try to feminize the Trinity, what you're doing is mixing metaphysical systems, because masculine-feminine doesn't belong to a ternary system. The ternary system uses both of them and is beyond both of them. And as a result, it drives into a new dimension, which I think we desperately need to drive into with both our men's work and our women's work, into what is the new creation. But my sense is that the